Welcome, everybody, to another edition of Let's Debate the Fantasy Genre. I asked you for your controversial opinions, and today we're going to jump into the best of those that had the most upvotes, especially if they were further down and had a lot of upvotes, because that means people later on saw them and were like, yes, controversial, we like it. Reminder to always upvote the best controversial opinions, not ones that are actively seeking to just be contrarian, but the ones that seem like genuine takes that are representative of some of the hottest takes fantasy has to offer. Let's jump into it. No one has ever read The Wheel of Time, even Daniel. How dare you? I've read it a million bajillion times, and that's the real point of being a fantasy fan, is the cold, hard stats of how many times you've read a book, because that's what's important, not the enjoyment or what you take away. It's the numbers, obviously. But yeah, a lot of people I've actually found out have lied about reading Wheel of Time. It's a bit odd to start talking with them and they clearly haven't actually read it. It's something that's happened to me multiple occasions now, and it's like, oh, this is uncomfortable. Like, what am I supposed to do? Just be like, oh, you're a liar to their face, or just like slowly back out of the convo? Usually I do the latter. Malazan is a dark horse who everyone acknowledges but no one reads. Excuse? Most hot takes are pretty darn lukewarm. That's one spicy take right there, I'd say. A lot of authors write a variety of diverse male characters with all sorts of quirks/issues, but seem to stick to the same 5 female tropes, including the confident female that starts out not having enough confidence in themselves. I would love to see more quirky female characters like Ari Kingkiller, or a group dynamic like Malazan Bone Hunters, where the females in the group are as unique as the males. This problem is getting drastically better as time goes on, especially recently. I've reviewed quite a few books on the channel that had very unique and interesting female leads, so that was a great change of pace, but this has been a problem up until recently. But I'm happy to say, at least in my experience, we're having some pretty quick solvent of the issue right away. Representation in fantasy is nice, but should never be a selling point for a book. Representation being as an advertised positive for a book/series just means the plot, world, and characters are piss poor at best. So if you're coming at this from a marketing standpoint and your book you're trying to sell has representation that's not standard for, like, Christian European fantasy, which still dominates the genre, of course you're going to market that way because it helps what you're trying to promote sell. It has nothing to do with the quality of the content. It's just something to be different as, and the marketing has absolutely nothing to do with the quality of the content. One thing I have learned after doing this for 4 years is that how a book is marketed by a publisher, especially if it's one of the bigger publishing houses, has very little to do with the actual quality of the book inside. But in general, no! Don't fall for marketing gimmicks actually changing your perception of a book. Soft magic systems get a really hard time. I love hard magic systems, but I'll happily take something a little less strict so long as it fits the story and the world. The ongoing debate between hard and soft magic systems is something that I'm quickly growing tired of because I've realized there's no right answer to. It basically is just, what's the story need? And authors, I've found in general, are very good at figuring out which type of system will best serve their story, and often the line is way more blurred than most people give credit for. There are so few magic systems that are definitively hard or definitively soft because it's a spectrum and it's a bell curve. So I don't know. This is one that to me is just becoming more and more silly the more I talk about it. So I actually kind of agree with you. We're like, yeah, both are fine. Just do whatever's best for your story. Vin was established as a great character in book 1. So was Ellen. The problem is they have zero chemistry together. And a lot of book 2 pivots around an ultra bland relationship. A quasi-shoehorned love triangle. Brando Sando didn't play to his strengths here. That is a controversial take, and I commend you for being willing to take it on, because a lot of Mistborn fans are super passionate, and I'll throw myself under the bus here by saying I somewhat agree with you. It's not the best romance and relationship ever, and Brandon Sanderson since then has gotten way better at writing chemistry in that sense. So yes, I agree. Book 1 of The Wheel of Time is literally the Fellowship of the Ring. That's not a controversial hot take. That is something that anyone who pays attention knows and was deliberately done. So literally the coldest of takes. Snape was not an anti-hero. He was a redeemed villain. Also, he didn't love Lily. He was obsessed with her since she was the first person to be nice to him. If he loved her, he wouldn't have called her a slur, joining an elitist group that wanted to kill her kind and bully her son because he hated the father. Yeah, Snape's like a creepy neckbeard, nice guy douchebag, and Yeah, I was in the bandwagon of like, oh, he's such a cool character for a while, but now looking back, J.K. Rowling is framing him all wrong. Harry should not like him or respect him at all. Yeah, he made one sacrifice play, but Snape still really sucks as a person. One redeeming act does not justify a lifetime of butchery and awfulness. Mistborn Series 2 has a better setting than Mistborn Series 1. Interesting. No comment. Japanese fantasy writing outside of anime is extremely underrated, and it's truly a shame as there's such a wealth of ideas and concepts that extend beyond their mythos and classic fairy tales of Western world could take a few notes from. I love hearing that, and it makes me really want to pick up more Japanese fantasy outside of anime, so I appreciate this one, and I can't say whether you're right or wrong, but it motivates me to pick up some normal Japanese fantasy books. Lives of Locke Lamora was just Locke was cool and the city felt truly alive, but the story was bland and got worse as it went on. I felt absolutely no connection to or between any of the other gentleman bastards. I'm just gonna have to go with a disagree and say you're a well-rounded individual who's allowed to have their own subjective opinion. I'll have my right one, and you can sit in your wrongness. People's criticism of Wise Man's Fear being listless and lack a drive in the main story is incorrect. Ooh! The story of the Kingkiller Chronicles is the story of an orphan turns into a legendary wizard and how that legend turns into an incognito innkeeper. The story of how Kvothe becomes Kvothe Kingkiller and how Kvothe Kingkiller becomes Kote. KKC has a theme of the nature of stories being a rolling stone, and what comes out of the bottom of the mountain isn't what started the tumble at the top. Kvothe has so many stories about him, and Wise Man's Fear explains the origin of those stories with his sword training, his meeting the I can't pronounce that right now, his adventures with the Eld and with the mayor. The arc of how the orphan turned into a legend is over. Now in book 3, we have to find out why he had to go into hiding, how Kvothe became Quote. Yeah, that's all very nice justification for what was an incredibly listless and wandering story that didn't answer the questions people really wanted to focus on. Patrick Rothfuss could have just as easily just relegated that stuff to the back burner in the story, and I think everyone would have been fine and satisfied. We could just fill in the blanks on our own. Instead, it feels like a whole story of filling in the blanks, and now Patrick has all these questions he has to answer in one book if he's going to stick by his timeline, and it just feels impossible. It feels so hard, and it's why myself and many other people believe this next book's taking so long, because he's trying to figure out how to answer so many questions when he spent the first 2 books pretty much just asking questions. Don't be a J.J. Abrams. Don't be a J.J. Abrams. You answer questions. Answer them. Malazan is head and shoulders above Wheel of Time. The world is bigger and more diverse, the cast is way more likable, and the concepts are far more interesting. I'm only 3 books into Malazan, so I can't speak on this. All I can do is redirect you to one of the real hot takes at the beginning of this video, where apparently no one has actually read these yet. My hot take about Harry Potter books: lack of world building and expansion. I never liked how the author didn't make any exploration about magic, such as France school, Japan school, Northeast America school. I would love to see more about series, spin-offs, and adventures. I'm tired about hearing Hogwarts all the time. I strongly disagree with this one, because the very self-contained story in Harry Potter very much so needed to focus on Hogwarts and the wizarding world of the UK, and it would have been really strange to jump over to North America or France for something that was very contained to just this part of the wizarding world. So hard no, especially because you said lacks world building, when I think anyone who reads Harry Potter, even the most harsh critics, have to take their hats off for the incredible amount of world building that goes in for just pretty much all the world being infused with magic. Although I think you may have just phrased what your criticism was wrong, because I think a lot of even hardcore fans would agree with you if you turned around and were like, hey, what I want, what I need, what'll be better is a story focusing on the wider wizarding world, which would have been a way smarter move for J.K. Rowling to put out as a book, rather than the travesty that is Cursed Child. So I'm agreeing with you in some ways here, where I do want more stories that aren't Hogwarts focused, but because you specifically said Harry Potter, and Harry Potter is such a wizard school, Hogwarts specifically focused story, it would have been nearly impossible to do naturally. So yes and no. More fantasy adaptations should be animated. Live action shouldn't be seen as the apex of bringing book to screen. Completely agree. There is certainly some stories that could come to life better if they were animated. Mistborn is a superheroes and a fantasy crossover. I mean, kinda. Historic realism in fantasy is A, boring, B, almost never accurate to history, but rather to whatever the author has decided they think history is, and C, usually just an excuse for authors to ignore that women/people of color/LGBTQ people exist. This is a really bad take, in my opinion, because criticizing historical realism in fantasy for not being accurate to the history is absurd beyond belief, because what they're doing is they're taking inspiration from a real event and then doing whatever the hell they want with it, and they have every right to do whatever the hell they want with it. So any inaccuracies are completely justified and fine to have, and them bothering you as a history nerd, trust me, I'm a history nerd too, is kind of ludicrous and not the mentality or attitude you should have. I just find that to be a very odd pet peeve that the genre of historical realism that is then twisted is completely allowed to do. And for the excuse about excluding people of color and LGBTQ+ and all this stuff, no, I don't agree with that either, because there's just often completely fake fantasy worlds that do this as well, and it's part of their world. And so if you're going to do one based off our world, it would suddenly be weird. It's like you're saying, no, stay true to history and don't change things, but also shove in the stuff that you want representation-wise. That doesn't add up and doesn't work. I don't think it's an excuse by any means, and I think this is a bad hot take. Star Wars is the most chicken shit movie franchise currently running. The Force and its relationships with the Jedi/Sith are such vast canvases for artful storytelling. But as far as the movies go, strictly, it's more concerned about merchandising and pandering to people who watched the original trilogy nearly 40 years ago. I'm well aware the books and television series are more complex, but I'd like to see that same level of intricacy extended to the future movie entries. Hell yes. George R. Martin doesn't deserve the amount of praise and awards he gets for an unfinished series that will probably never get finished. I don't get this "it's never going to get finished" thing. He's definitely planning on finishing it, and if he dies beforehand, that's not his fault. And there's also a lot of things happening right now that show he's making great progress. So this I don't like. It falls into that, people pressuring someone to finish art before art is done area. And the guy's been incredibly busy and has put out things in the last couple of years. So I don't like this one. This one's a no. And his books that have been written so far are amazing and on a level, especially with character that is rarely seen. So hard disagree, no. And the idea that somehow his books would not be as good if he's unable to finish the series is, again, not something I agree with. Just because something goes unfinished does not mean what he built so far should be discounted. New Spring is better than any other Wheel of Time book in the series. I picked this one because I've literally heard no one say it before. If your taste goes down a certain path, especially like a smaller, more intimate story, I could see this being an opinion someone has. But outside of that, you need the rest of the books to justify the world and really build things enough for me as a Wheel of Time fan that I certainly couldn't call it the best, but I respect your opinion, and I would assume as a reader, you're much more of a smaller, focused on just this one little journey type reader, and that's fine. We had one from James Toulos here, which oh man. Lord of the Rings is a foundation of the fantasy genre and is a showcase of how far world building can go. That said, most of the world building is boring. Ooh! I think that is a very hot take to have and something that has been brought up repeatedly. But I want to, because it's coming from their content creators, say that what is boring as you read often comes from just preference entirely. I mean, some people think that reading the Bible is a thrill ride, and I hard disagree on that. But when it comes to this specific hot take, I will say I don't know anybody who's gotten all the way through the trilogy who finds it boring. Let me know if you are of that, because I'd love to see some people who have read all of Lord of the Rings and are still willing to say, yes, it's boring. Because usually once your mindset adjusts to Tolkien's writing style, you can't call it boring. You can't anymore. But this has been some fantasy hot takes. Let me know what you think of my takes to the hot takes. This is meant, I wanted to be a little more antagonistic here, because in the last one everyone said I was too nice. So hey, I came back slapping. Like and subscribe if you have not already. Hit the Patreon if you want to support what I do here. And have a good one, y'all. Peace. And of course, I want to record a special shout out to my latest high tier Patreon, who I should have done in yesterday's video but didn't have the time to do, and that is Waffalafiak HQ. I did my best. Have a good one, y'all. Peace.